I'm Harper Mitchell, 31 years old, and that night still replays in my mind like a film I never asked to star in. The smell of roasted chicken hung heavy in the air, the kind my mother made every Sunday, but this wasn't a Sunday dinner. My father, Robert, had called a family meeting. His tone clipped his tie, still hanging loose from work. I thought maybe he wanted to discuss the rising utility bills or Chloe's college applications, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. When his words finally came, they cracked through the air like a whip. "You're nothing but a leech, Harper. You can't stay here anymore." Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand your ground when someone tried to tear you down. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, the first daughter of a man who believed respect came only through obedience. My father built his life on hard rules and louder opinions, while my mother made herself small enough to keep the peace. From the time I could count, I'd been taught that family was everything, that you stick together, no matter what, that you don't air your problems outside those four walls. And for a long time, I believed it. I went to community college, worked my way into a steady job in medical billing, and sent most of my paycheck home when things got tight. When Mom's blood pressure spiked, I covered her doctor visits. When Chloe's school trip came up short, I quietly paid the difference. Every small act felt like doing what family should do. The Mitchell house was a 2-story craftsman tucked at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that looked peaceful from the outside, white siding, trimmed hedges, the faint hum of sprinklers in the summer. Inside, though, the air was heavy. The living room always smelled of furniture polish and tension. Robert ran the house like a command post. If the thermostat moved a single degree, he noticed. If dinner was late by 5 minutes, he called it disrespect. Mom Linda floated between us like a careful diplomat, smoothing napkins and stirring gravy to avoid conflict. Chloe stayed quiet, eyes always flicking toward Dad before she spoke. I'd learned early that silence was the currency of survival in that house. But silence has a way of costing more than words. Over the years, I became the family's invisible backbone. Every light bill, every grocery run, every late-night pharmacy trip, my name was on the receipts, but my parents called it helping out. I told myself it was temporary, that once Chloe graduated and Mom's health steadied, I'd finally move into my own apartment. Yet the months bled into years, and every time I hinted at leaving, Dad would remind me how much they'd done for me. My gratitude became their leverage, my income their lifeline. That night at the dinner table, something in his voice told me this wasn't just about money. He sat at the head of the table, his hands pressed flat against the wood. The overhead light flickered, glinting off his wedding ring like a warning. "You strut around here like you own this place," he said, his voice cold. "Paying a few bills doesn't make you the boss. You're a leech, Harper, and I want you gone before the weekend." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they surprised me, but because deep down I think I'd been waiting for them. Mom's fork stilled over her plate, but she didn't look up. Instead, she folded her napkin neatly as if this were just another dinner conversation. "You'll still cover the medical insurance this month, won't you?" she murmured. "I have that appointment Tuesday." Her request landed heavier than any insult. My sister Chloe sat across from me, her knuckles white around her glass of water, eyes wide and pleading. She didn't speak. None of them did. I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, but no tears came, only a kind of quiet, hollow calm. I laid my fork down carefully, the clink of metal sharp in the still air. "Do you even hear yourselves?" I asked, my voice low. "I've paid the power bill, the internet, the groceries, even your doctor visits, Mom, and this is what I get in return." Dad slammed his palm against the table so hard the glasses rattled. "Don't twist this on us. You've forgotten your place. This is my house, and I say when someone's worn out, they're welcome." He expected me to plead, maybe even apologize. But something inside me shifted. The anger I'd swallowed for years didn't flare into shouting, it settled into something sharper, steadier. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. "I understand perfectly," I said, meeting his stare. He blinked, thrown off by my calm. Mom sighed again as if the sound alone could close the moment. "Just make sure the check clears before Tuesday," she said softly. I rose from the table, carrying my plate to the sink. The smell of roasted chicken and lemon cleaner filled my lungs, but it all felt foreign now. The house, the family, even my name on the mailbox, none of it felt like mine. Behind me, Dad barked, "Did you hear me? Out by the weekend." I turned voice even. "No need to wait that long," I said. "I'll be gone much sooner." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Chloe's fork slipped from her hand, clattering onto her plate. Dad's face reddened, but he didn't move. For the first time, I wasn't the one trembling. I walked down the hallway to my room, each step echoing in the stillness. When I closed the door behind me, the sound was final, not just a door shutting, but a life breaking open. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small room that had once been my refuge. The walls were lined with photographs, birthdays, holidays, pieces of a life I'd been financing but never fully belonged to. My reflection in the window looked older than 31 eyes, tired, but awake. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this night wasn't just an ending. It was the start of something else, something I didn't yet have a name for. And as the hum of the house faded behind the door, a single thought pulsed through me like a heartbeat. If they wanted me gone, they were about to get exactly what they asked for. The next morning, the house was quiet in that hollow way that only follows a storm. Sunlight pushed weakly through the blinds, landing on the half-packed suitcase at the foot of my bed. My mind replayed my father's words again and again, his voice sharp, certain final. For years I had given that man my loyalty, my wages, my peace, and somehow it had still never been enough. I opened the dresser drawer, started folding clothes, and felt something loosen inside me with every careful crease. When I slid open the bottom drawer, a few envelopes slipped forward. They weren't mine. The name on the top one read, Robert Mitchell. That stopped me cold. I hadn't seen paper bank statements in months. Dad had switched everything to online banking ages ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, curiosity winning out over hesitation, and opened one. The numbers jumped off the page, a balance far higher than I expected. I checked the next and the next. Each month, the total grew, climbing from 200 to 5,000 to nearly 7. My pulse quickened. Taped to the back of one statement was a glossy brochure for a fishing boat, a model circled in blue ink with down payment $500. Delivery after Thanksgiving scribbled across the margin. The air left my lungs. While I had been working double shifts paying doctor bills and buying groceries, my father had been quietly saving for a new boat. The thought hit like a punch to the gut. My eyes blurred as I gripped the paper tighter. The knock on my door startled me. Chloe slipped inside, her face pale, her voice barely a whisper. "You're really leaving?" she asked. I turned to her, still holding the statements in my shaking hand. "Did you know about this?" Her gaze darted to the papers, then back to me. I heard them talking. She admitted, her voice trembling. "Dad said if anyone warned you, they'd be next." She twisted her hands together, eyes filling with tears. "I wanted to tell you, Harper. I swear. But you don't know what he's like when he's angry." The betrayal stung sharper than I wanted to admit. My little sister had known. Maybe not every detail, but enough to stay silent while I drained myself to keep this family afloat. "So you let me keep paying everything I said quietly." My voice cracked around the edges. Chloe shook her head, crying now. "I was scared. I didn't want him to hurt you or me." For a long moment, I just looked at her. She was young, still tangled in fear the way I had been for years. I couldn't even blame her. The weight of what I'd just discovered pressed heavier on my chest than anger could. "Close the door, Chloe," I said softly, "and let me finish packing." When she left, the latch clicked like a final note. I stared at the bank statements again, the glossy boat brochure gleaming under the morning light. My family had used me, and now they were discarding me. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I gathered the papers and slipped them into my suitcase, meaning to keep them as proof of what I'd paid and what they'd taken. Beneath them was another folder, one labeled Insurance. I flipped it open, expecting to see Mom's cardiology receipts or prescription refills. Instead, a thin white slip slid onto the floor. When I picked it up, the words froze me in place. Dermal filler injections. My mother's procedure's cosmetic, not medical, billed under my insurance plan. I sank back against the bed frame. 3 months ago, I had nearly $10,000 in savings.
Now my balance barely broke 700. The numbers told the story I hadn't wanted to see. All those nights I skipped dinner working late so the bills wouldn't pile up. Mom had been in a clinic smoothing wrinkles and plumping lips. A laugh slipped out before I could stop it, sharp and bitter. "So that's what my ramen noodles bought you, Mom," I muttered. The door creaked again and Chloe peeked in. She must have heard me. "Harper," she asked, voice trembling. I held up the receipt. "Do you know about this?" Her silence said enough. She stared at the carpet, cheeks flushed. I stood the paper, shaking in my hand. 3 jobs, I said, my voice rising. I worked 3 jobs and skipped lunch to save $20, and she was using my insurance for vanity, Chloe whispered. She told Dad it was for her health. She said you'd never check the details. I slammed the drawer shut so hard the handle rattled. Of course she did. I said the fury burning cold now. Why would I question it? I was too busy paying for everything else. My phone lay on the desk. I grabbed it and opened my banking app. The number glowed on the screen, $782.46. That was all I had left. My throat tightened, but the tears wouldn't come. "Sorry doesn't refill my account," I told Chloe quietly. "Sorry doesn't erase what they did." She stood frozen in the doorway, helpless, small. I zipped my suitcase, my decision made. "This ends tonight," I said. "Not one more bill, not one more lie." Chloe's lips trembled. "Where will you go?" I hesitated only a second. "Somewhere they can't find me." When the door closed behind her, the silence was almost peaceful. I dragged my suitcase to the center of the room and looked around one last time. Every piece of furniture, every framed photo, every trinket on the dresser was something I'd bought or fixed or paid to maintain. I wasn't a burden. I had been the foundation holding this family together. I reached under the bed for an old shoebox where I kept receipts, proof of all the bills I'd covered over the years. The new refrigerator, Chloe's laptop, utilities, groceries, all of it under my name. Each slip of paper felt like a piece of my life I was reclaiming. I tucked the box into my suitcase and zipped it closed. The house was quiet, but through the thin walls I could hear the low hum of voices from the hallway. I pressed my ear against the door. My father's tone was smug. "Once she's gone, we'll turn her room into storage," he said. "No more of her junk cluttering up the place." My mother's reply came light, careless. "She'll pay the insurance one last time before she leaves. That's all I care about." A chill spread through me, cold and steady. Not daughter, not family, just storage space and a bank account. I backed away from the door, hands trembling. The tears that came then weren't for sadness, they were release. I wiped them quickly and checked my phone. One name stood out in my contacts. Megan. I dialed. She answered on the second ring, voice groggy but warm. "Harper. It's late." "What's wrong?" I whispered. "Can I crash at your place tonight?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "Get out of there. I'll leave the door unlocked." I hung up, grabbed my keys, and opened the window. The night air rushed in crisp and clean. I looked down at the driveway where my old car sat, waiting the silver paint catching the faint glow of the porch light. My father's voice echoed faintly down the hall. I couldn't risk the stairs. One creak and he'd be standing in the doorway, demanding control one last time. I whispered to myself, "You've paid for everything here. You owe them nothing." The words steadied me. Step by careful step, I slipped out the window, lowering my suitcase to the ground. The air was cool against my skin, carrying the sound of crickets and a distant dog barking. I crossed the yard, heart pounding every step, a small act of freedom. The front door stayed closed. No lights flicked on. For the first time in years, the night was mine. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk, slid behind the wheel, and started the engine. The headlights cut across the front porch, washing over the house that had once been my entire world. As I drove away, the reflection in the rearview mirror shrank until it was just a shadow at the end of the street. That house had never been my home. It had been a cage I'd finally learned how to unlock. And somewhere between the blinking red light and the highway on-ramp, I realized that escape wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. By the time I reached Megan's apartment, dawn was only a thin gray line over the city. The streets were empty and the hum of my car's engine was the only sound I could hear. My body moved on instinct, one foot after the other, as if I were afraid that stopping would make the last few hours feel real. Megan's apartment door opened before I even knocked. She stood there barefoot, hair pulled into a loose bun, her expression soft with concern. "You're here," she said simply. I nodded, dragging my suitcase across the threshold. The moment the door closed, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying slipped off my shoulders. The apartment was warm, filled with the faint scent of coffee and vanilla candles. It was nothing like home. No tension in the air, no raised voices, just quiet. Megan guided me to the couch, pressed a mug of tea into my hands, and waited. When I finally spoke, the words came out flat. "He called me a leech," I said, "told me to get out." Megan didn't interrupt. She just sat beside me, listening as I recounted the night, the dinner table, the bills, the hidden bank statements, the receipts, everything. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. "You've carried them for years, Harper. They should have been thanking you, not throwing you out." For a while, we sat in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then she handed me a blanket and nodded toward the pull-out couch. "Get some rest," she said softly. "You can figure out the rest later." When I woke that afternoon, sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. My mind was hazy at first, but then the memory of the night before came rushing back. I reached for my phone and saw a stream of missed calls, Mom, Dad, even a few from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. My voicemail icon blinked. Against my better judgment, I played one. "Harper." My mother's voice snapped through the speaker. "The power's out. The internet's down. My appointment was canceled because the insurance didn't go through. You can't just leave us like this. We're your family." The message ended abruptly. I stared at the phone, my stomach twisting. Megan appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs in her hands. She didn't have to ask what I'd heard. "Let it go," she said gently. "They'll have to learn to manage without you." The next few hours blurred into a quiet routine. I made lists, bills in my name, accounts I needed to close, payments still pending. Megan sat across from me at the small kitchen table, occasionally passing me a sticky note or pouring more coffee. "Operation Financial Freedom," she joked lightly. I gave a weak smile. "Something like that." We spent the day canceling everything: utilities, internet, automatic payments, each confirmation email, another small victory. By evening, Ethan came home from work, his golden retriever bounding ahead of him. "Evening, Harper," he said, with an easy grin. "Meet Rocky, the world's neediest roommate." The dog trotted straight to me, dropped a slobbery tennis ball in my lap, and stared with hopeful eyes. I blinked at him, then tossed the ball across the room. He sprinted after it, nails skidding on the floor. Ethan chuckled. "Therapy with fur," he said. For the first time in days, I laughed. That night after they'd gone to bed, I lay awake on the pull-out couch with Rocky curled at my feet. My phone buzzed again, a new voicemail from my mother. I hesitated before pressing play. Her tone had shifted from sharp to pleading. "Harper, please, we can't do this without you. Your father is furious. He says you're trying to destroy the family. Just call us back." I let it play to the end, then deleted it. The next morning, Megan found me still surrounded by paperwork, circles of coffee on the table beside my lists. "You're really doing it," she said softly. "You're cutting every tie." I nodded. They've had control over my life for too long. This time it ends. We drove to the bank after breakfast, the early light glinting off the windshield. My hands trembled slightly as I signed the final forms, removing my name from every shared account. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes, double-checked the documents. "Once this is processed," she said, "you'll no longer be responsible for any linked balances or debts." I managed a small smile. "That's exactly what I need." She stamped the last page, and just like that, it was official. When we stepped back into the crisp autumn air, I felt something strange, both empty and free. But beneath that freedom lingered a quiet dread. My father would find out soon enough, and when he did, the storm would come. 2 days later it arrived. It started as a pounding on the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. Megan jumped, spilling coffee across the counter. "What on earth?" she began, but the voice outside cut through everything. "Harper." My father's roar echoed down the hallway. "Open this door right now." My body went cold.
Ethan was already moving toward the entryway, positioning himself between me and the door. Rocky barked, tail-stiff teeth bared. The pounding grew louder. "You think you can just walk out?" Robert shouted. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" Megan grabbed my arm. "Don't open it," she whispered. "Call the police." My hands shook as I dialed. "There's a man outside my apartment door," I told the dispatcher, voice trembling. "He's trying to break in. He's my father." Meanwhile, Robert's voice grew harsher. "You owe me for everything I've ever given you. Your braces, your tuition. I made you who you are." His fist slammed against the wood, splintering it near the lock. I backed away, heart racing, the phone still pressed to my ear. "Please hurry," I whispered to the dispatcher. Ethan stood firm, his voice low. "Sir, the police are on their way. You need to leave." But Robert didn't listen. His shouts turned to snarls, his breath loud against the door. Then faintly at first, the sound of sirens approached, growing louder, until blue and red lights flashed through the windows. "Step away from the door," a voice boomed from the hallway. 2 security guards appeared, flashlights cutting through the dim corridor. "Police are on their way," one warned. Robert spun around defiant. "This is between me and my daughter." "Not anymore," the guard snapped. "Step back." For a heartbeat, Robert hesitated. Then, as if realizing he'd lost his fury, collapsed into something bitter. "You'll regret this, Harper," he shouted. "You'll regret ever crossing me." The sirens wailed closer. When the police arrived, the scene shifted in a blur of commands and flashing lights. 2 officers moved quickly, cuffing him as he continued to yell. "She's destroying this family," he shouted. "She's selfish." But his voice sounded smaller now, desperate, instead of powerful. I stood frozen near the kitchen counter, my knees weak. Officer Clark approached gently. "Are you Harper Mitchell?" I nodded, unable to speak. "You're safe now," he said. "We'll need your statement." Behind him, they led Robert down the hall. Neighbors peeked from their doors, whispering behind hands. For once, I didn't feel shame under their eyes. I felt something closer to peace. When the last officer left, the apartment fell into an uneasy quiet. Ethan locked the deadbolt. Megan exhaled shakily, and Rocky pressed his head against my leg. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I sank onto the couch, still trembling. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm not going back. Not ever." The night settled heavy, but for the first time in years, the fear that had lived in my chest began to fade. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with certainty: I was done being afraid of him. The morning after my father's arrest, the apartment felt like a war room. Papers covered every inch of the coffee table, receipts, utility statements, insurance forms, everything that could prove the truth of what I'd endured. Megan brewed another pot of coffee while Ethan helped me sort through the piles. The air smelled like roasted beans and printer ink, the kind of mix that felt both ordinary and life-altering at once. Rocky snored under the table, his tail flicking each time one of us moved. When Officer Clark called, his voice was steady but firm. "Ms. Mitchell, we need to follow up on last night. Do you have proof of your financial contributions to your parents' household?" I almost laughed at the question, not out of amusement but relief. Proof was one thing I had plenty of. "Yes," I said, "a whole box full." We met at the precinct that afternoon. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above us, casting a pale glow over the stack of papers I'd brought. Officer Clark and his partner, Officer Davis, flipped through each receipt carefully. "You've been carrying this family for months," Davis murmured, scanning the grocery totals and payment stubs. "And they still called you a leech." His tone held quiet disbelief. I nodded, hands clasped in my lap. He looked up. "This will help your case if you decide to file for a restraining order." Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. Chloe's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was shaky. "Harper, Mom pawned your laptop and camera. She said you owed her." My stomach clenched. Where, I asked. "Parkway Pawn," she whispered. I heard her bragging on the phone. "She got $300. I gripped the phone tighter. Those items were worth over $2,000. Officer Davis noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. I handed him the phone. "She just sold my property without permission." He motioned toward the evidence pile. "Do you have receipts or serial numbers?"
"Yes," I said, quickly pulling the papers from my folder. He scanned them, then nodded. "Good. Pawning someone else's property is theft. We'll recover them." That afternoon, the officers escorted me back to the house. The drive felt endless, my heart thudding harder with every turn of the wheel. As we pulled up to the familiar curb, I saw curtains twitch across the street. Neighbors were watching Mrs. Miller from her porch, Mrs. Johnson by her mailbox. Their eyes followed us as we walked to the front door. Linda opened it before we could knock. Her smile was brittle, her eyes darting between the badges and my face. "Harper, honey," she said sweetly, "you didn't need to bring the police. We can settle this as a family." Officer Clark's voice cut through her words. "We're here so Ms. Mitchell can collect her belongings safely. Please step aside, ma'am." Linda hesitated, her mouth tightening, but she moved. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of lemon cleaner and stale air hitting me all at once. Each step felt heavier than the last. The walls were just as I'd left them, family photos, polished frames, but the warmth they once held was gone. It all felt staged, like a set, built for a family that no longer existed. In my old room, I began to pack. Clothes, books, a few keepsakes that still meant something. Linda hovered in the doorway, arms crossed. "That desk stays," she said sharply. "It's family property." I held up the receipt. "Bought it with my first paycheck. My name, my card. Would you like to see the date?" Her mouth opened, then shut again. Officer Clark glanced between us, his tone calm but decisive. "She has proof, ma'am. Everything she takes is hers." I folded another sweater and set it neatly in the suitcase. Every motion felt deliberate, like each fold was reclaiming a piece of my life. When the rumble of an engine reached my ears, my heart stopped. A familiar car rolled into the driveway, my car. Robert stepped out, his posture rigid, his expression smug. He dangled the keys from his hand like a trophy. I stepped outside before the officers could stop me. "That's my car," I said firmly. Robert's smirk deepened. "Spare key," he said. "You think I'd let you just drive off after everything I paid for? Your braces, your tuition, you owe me that car." His words struck with that same rehearsed authority he'd always used to win arguments. I reached into my bag and handed Officer Davis a folder. Title and registration, both in my name. Davis flipped through the documents, then turned to Robert. "Sir, this vehicle belongs to Harper. Hand over the keys." Robert's face turned crimson. "She wouldn't even have an education without me," he shouted. "I put food in her mouth for 18 years, Officer Clark stepped forward, his voice firm. "Keys now." The standoff stretched for a long, tense moment. Robert's jaw flexed, his fingers tightening around the key ring. Then, with a growl, he slapped them into Davis's palm. I took them, my grip steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Come near me or my property again," I said quietly, "and I'll file for a restraining order, and I'll win." The neighborhood had gone silent. Mrs. Miller stood frozen on her porch. Mrs. Johnson clutched her phone, whispering to her husband beside her. Even Linda didn't speak. Robert's shoulders sagged, his fury collapsing into something that looked almost like defeat. For the first time, he seemed small. I slid into the driver's seat, my suitcase waiting in the back. The keys were warm in my hand, the metal pressing into my palm, like proof that I finally had something that was only mine. Through the window, I caught sight of Chloe standing in the doorway. Her eyes were wet, her hand raised in a hesitant wave. I nodded once, unable to speak. Then I started the car. The engine came alive beneath me, steady and sure. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back right away. But when I did, the house seemed smaller somehow, its white paint dull, the shutters sagging under the weight of its secrets. The cage I'd lived in for years was fading into the distance, replaced by open road and quiet possibility. By the time I reached the intersection, the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees. I rolled down the window, letting the breeze rush in. For the first time in years, the air tasted like freedom. When I reached the edge of town, my phone buzzed with another unknown number, but I silenced it. Whatever message waited could stay unheard. I had what mattered now, my car, my proof, and a life that was finally mine to rebuild. As I turned toward the city skyline, lights flickering ahead like a path forward, I realized I wasn't just leaving a house behind. I was leaving a version of myself that had spent too long apologizing for taking up space. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was just the beginning of the life I was meant to live. After leaving that driveway for the last time, I didn't go far. My hands stayed tight on the steering wheel as the sun dipped lower behind the trees. Every mile between me and that house felt like an exhale I'd been holding for years. But freedom, I was learning, came with silence, the kind that echoed in your chest and left too much space for old memories to crawl in. 3 days passed before my phone began to buzz, non-stop. First came Aunt Carol, then Aunt Diane. By the time the fourth cousin called, I already knew what they were going to say. Honestly, Harper Aunt Carol began her voice thick with disapproval. "Your parents say you walked out and left them high and dry. How could you do that to your own family?" I held the phone away for a second, staring at the screen. "Did Robert mention that he threw me out?" I asked, "or that Mom never once defended me?" There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "Families fight," she said finally, her tone softening just enough to sting. "But walking away, it's heartless." I ended the call before she could continue. The texts poured in next each one, echoing the same line Harper ran away. "Harper's selfish. Harper doesn't care." I sat at the small kitchen table in Megan's apartment, watching the messages scroll by until my screen went black. Megan set a mug of coffee in front of me, her expression calm but firm. "You don't owe them your silence," she said. "You've carried them long enough." That afternoon I began making lists. It started as a distraction, but soon became a mission. Every account still in my name, utilities, insurance, internet, would be closed by week's end. Operation Financial Freedom. Megan called it half-teasing as she passed me a notebook. I smiled faintly. "Almost done," I said, checking off boxes as I spoke. "Electric internet insurance, all canceled." Ethan came home halfway through the process, his golden retriever bounding in ahead of him. "Evening, Harper," he said, rubbing Rocky's ears. "He's been waiting for you all day." The dog dropped a ball at my feet, tail wagging expectantly. I picked it up, tossed it across the living room, and watched him skid after it. For a moment, the weight in my chest eased. "See," Ethan said softly, "some therapy doesn't require words." I smiled at that, grateful for the quiet kindness they both offered so freely. But peace never stayed long. That evening, as we cleaned up dinner, my phone lit again, Mom. The voicemail came through moments later. I pressed play, even though I already knew what to expect. "What have you done?" "Harper," her voice snapped sharp with panic. "The power's out. The internet is gone. My appointment was canceled because the insurance didn't go through. You can't just leave us like this. We're your family." The message ended with the faint sound of her crying. Megan leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. "How do you feel?" she asked. I stared at the phone for a long time before answering. "Like I finally cut the chains," I said. "But I know they won't stop there." That night, lying on the pull-out couch, I scrolled through my bank account. My savings were nearly gone, the remaining balance barely enough for a small apartment deposit. 3 jobs over the past year, 3 months of paying their bills, and this was all I had left. Rocky climbed up beside me, resting his head on my chest. His slow, steady breathing filled the quiet. "They don't get to take any more from me," I whispered into the dark. By morning, determination replaced exhaustion. Megan found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork again. "Ready?" she asked, sliding me a fresh cup of coffee. I nodded. "Ready." We spent the day closing the last of the doors my parents had left open. At the bank, the clerk processed my forms without question. "Once this is finalized," she explained, "your name will be removed from every linked account. They'll be responsible for everything themselves." I signed the final line and felt a strange mix of relief and unease. "Perfect," I said quietly. The rest of that afternoon passed in a blur. Megan insisted on picking up takeout for dinner, saying I needed a break. When she left, the apartment was still except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I opened my notebook again, reading through the notes I'd made. There was nothing left tying me to that house, not legally, not financially. For the first time in years, I was completely free. But freedom didn't guarantee peace. Somewhere deep down, I knew my father wouldn't let go without a fight. It started that evening. A hard, relentless pounding rattled the apartment door, shaking the frame. Harper. The voice was unmistakable. Robert. He shouted again, louder this time. "Open this door right now." Megan froze in the kitchen, a takeout bag still in her hand. "How did he find us?" she whispered. Ethan stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between me and the door. Rocky growled low in his throat, his fur bristling. The pounding grew louder. "You think you can humiliate me? You don't get to destroy this family and hide behind strangers." My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. "I should call the police," I said. "Now," Megan urged. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I tried to keep my voice steady. "There's a man outside my apartment door," I said. "He's trying to break in. He's my father." As I spoke, Robert's voice boomed through the wood. "You owe me for everything I've done for you. I paid for your life." Ethan motioned for us to move back. Through the peephole, I saw my father's face red, twisted with fury, sweat glistening on his forehead. He slammed his fist against the door again, splintering the edge near the lock. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint at first, then louder, closer. Robert's shouting faltered for a moment, replaced by the distant echo of tires screeching to a stop. A voice thundered from the hallway. "Step away from the door." 2 security officers appeared, flashlights cutting across the narrow corridor. "Police are on the way," one warned. Robert spun toward them, defiant. "This is between me and my daughter." The guard's tone hardened. "Not anymore, sir. Step back." For a moment he hesitated. Then, realizing the fight was over, he roared one last time. "You'll regret this, Harper. You'll regret it." Blue and red lights flashed through the window as the officers arrived. Within seconds, they had him cuffed. His protests echoed down the hall. "She's the selfish one," he shouted. "She's destroying this family." I stood frozen near the couch, my hands still clutching the phone. Officer Clark appeared at the doorway moments later. "Are you Harper Mitchell?" he asked gently. I nodded. "You're safe now," he said. "We'll need your statement later." When the door finally closed behind them, the silence that followed was heavy and still. Megan sank onto the couch beside me, exhaling shakily. Ethan double-checked the locks, then crouched to calm Rocky, who still stood guard-tail rigid. I sat there staring at the door, the imprint of his fist still fresh in my mind. "I'm not going back," I said quietly. Megan's hand found mine, her grip steady. "You don't have to." That night, the city outside seemed quieter than usual. I lay awake listening to the hum of traffic and the soft breath of the dog at my feet. The fear that had ruled me for so long had finally begun to loosen its hold. I wasn't the same woman who'd stood frozen at that dinner table weeks ago. I had faced him and walked away still standing. And somewhere inside that quiet, I realized the truth that would guide me from then on. Freedom wasn't about escape. It was about refusing to let fear take root again. The morning after my father's arrest, I woke to the faint sound of rain against the windows. Megan was already in the kitchen, her voice low as she spoke to someone on the phone. The scent of coffee filled the air, grounding me in a way that only simple, ordinary things could. My suitcase sat by the wall, half open, a quiet reminder that my life was still somewhere between ending and beginning. Officer Clark called just after breakfast. "Harper," he said, his tone steady. "We'll need you to come in today to finalize your statement. Bring any remaining documents you have. The more we can verify, the stronger your case will be." A few hours later, I sat across from him at the precinct, the same box of receipts and records spread across the table. Officer Davis joined us, flipping through pages one by one. "You've kept everything," she said, impressed. "Utilities, groceries, medical payments. You've covered nearly every expense for that household." I nodded, my hands clasped tightly. Clark leaned forward, his expression serious. "With this evidence, you can pursue a restraining order and file for financial recovery. It's clear you were exploited." Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again, Chloe's name lighting up the screen. I hesitated, then answered quietly. "Harper," she said, her voice breaking. "Mom pawned your laptop and camera. She said you owed her money." I closed my eyes, a heavy ache settling in my chest. "Where?" I asked. "Parkway Pawn," she whispered. "She bragged about it on the phone, said she got $300. Davis caught my expression immediately. "Is something wrong?" I slid the phone across the table. "My mother sold my belongings. I have the receipts here, serial numbers included." She nodded briskly. "That's theft. We'll have them recovered." Later that afternoon, Clark and Davis accompanied me back to the house to collect the last of my things. The rain had stopped, but the air hung heavy with the smell of wet earth. When we pulled into the driveway, curtains shifted across the street, neighbors pretending not to watch. Linda opened the door before we reached the porch, her painted smile as practiced as ever. "Harper, sweetheart," she began, "you didn't have to bring the police again. We can talk about this." Clark's voice was firm. "We're here so Ms. Mitchell can safely collect her belongings. Please stand aside." Linda's smile faltered, but she stepped back. The house looked exactly the same, but it felt smaller, somehow hollow. I walked through the hallway slowly, every framed photo and polished table whispering of years spent trying to keep peace that never existed. In my old room, the air was still thick with memories I no longer wanted. I packed what I could, books, journals, clothes, every fold deliberate, every motion controlled. Linda lingered in the doorway, her voice sharp now. "That desk stays," she snapped. "It's part of the house." I turned to her, holding up a worn receipt. "Bought it with my first paycheck, Mom. Want to see the date?" Her jaw tightened. "Don't take that tone with me," she hissed, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Officer Davis stepped forward. "Ma'am, your daughter has proof of purchase. Everything she takes today is hers." I finished packing in silence. Each sweater folded into the suitcase felt like another piece of weight lifted. When I zipped it closed, I caught the low rumble of an engine outside. Through the front window, I saw my old car pulling into the driveway, my father's figure behind the wheel. The officers followed me out onto the porch as Robert climbed out, his smirk unmistakable. "Spare key," he said, dangling it between his fingers. "You didn't think I'd let you take off with my car after everything I've paid for, did you?" His voice was the same as always, calculated, full of self-importance. I stepped forward, calm but unwavering. "That car is mine," I said. "Title and registration are in my name." I handed the folder to Officer Davis. She scanned the papers, then looked at Robert. "Sir, the vehicle is legally registered to Harper Mitchell. Hand over the keys." His face darkened. "You wouldn't have an education without me," he barked. "I paid for your braces, your school, your life. You owe me that car." Clark took a step closer, his tone even but commanding. "Keys, now." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Robert's jaw clenched, and with a furious growl, he slapped the keys into Davis's hand. I took them carefully, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. "Come near me or my property again," I said quietly, "and I'll file that restraining order you're so afraid of." The street had gone completely silent. Mrs. Miller stood frozen on her porch while Mrs. Johnson pretended to check her mailbox phone in hand. Robert's expression wavered between anger and disbelief, his authority slipping with every passing second. For the first time, he looked small. I walked to the car, the officers close behind. The interior still smelled faintly of the air freshener I'd hung months ago, a small reminder that even inside their world, I'd managed to carve out something of my own. As I started the engine, the vibration beneath my hands felt like a heartbeat, steady and alive. Through the windshield, I saw Chloe standing in the doorway. Her shoulders were slumped, but her eyes were different, tired, sad but aware. She lifted her hand in a quiet wave. I nodded back, unable to speak. Then I shifted into drive. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its white siding fading into the distance. The sound of gravel crunching under the tires filled the silence as I turned the corner. When I reached the end of the street, I stopped at the light and took a long breath. The sky was clearing, streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running away. I was reclaiming what was left of me. Back at Megan's, the apartment was warm and quiet. Ethan greeted me at the door, relief softening his features. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Better than I've been in a long time." Rocky trotted over, pressing his head against my leg. I bent down to rub his ears, the tension in my shoulders slowly easing. Later that night, as the city lights flickered beyond the windows, I sat with Megan on the couch, the keys to my car resting in my palm. She glanced at them, then at me. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" I nodded. It's the first thing in years that's truly mine. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of rain returning outside. I looked toward the window, the reflection of my own face faint in the glass. The woman staring back didn't look hollow anymore, and even though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that for once it would be one I chose for myself. The weeks that followed were a quiet blur of paperwork calls and slow healing. The noise that had once filled my life, arguments, accusations, slammed doors, was replaced by something foreign, but welcome silence. Megan made sure I ate, Ethan made sure I slept, and Rocky followed me from room to room as if he'd appointed himself my shadow. For the first time in years, the air around me didn't feel like something I had to brace against. Then one morning, Officer Clark called. "Harper," he said, "we've recovered the items. Your mother pawned your laptop, your camera. We'll need you to come in and sign for them." His tone was steady, professional, but I heard the satisfaction beneath it. When I arrived, the evidence table looked more like a personal history return to me. The laptop I'd used for college, the camera I'd taken on every vacation. I ran my hand over the scratched casing, a lump catching in my throat. "You can file a civil claim if you choose," Davis told me gently. "But the main thing is they can't take from you anymore." Back at Megan's, I opened the laptop for the first time in months. It booted up slowly, whirring like it was waking from a long sleep. On the desktop were old photos, family birthdays, Christmas mornings, Chloe's high school play. The images felt distant now, like postcards from a place that no longer existed. A week later, Clark called again. "The restraining order's been processed," he said. "It's official. They can't come near your residence or workplace. Any violation and will act immediately." The weight of those words sank in slowly. For so long, safety had been something I only imagined. Now it was something signed, sealed, and legally protected. Chloe called that evening. Her voice was quieter, more grown somehow. "I moved into my dorm," she said. "It feels weird. Quiet, but good." I could hear laughter in the background. Her new roommate, maybe. "I'm proud of you," I told her. "Are Mom and Dad leaving you alone?" There was a pause. "Dad's been quiet since the arrest. Mom keeps saying it's your fault, but she's stopped calling as much." Her words carried both relief and guilt, a balance I knew too well. "You don't have to take care of them anymore, Chloe," I said softly. "Just focus on you." She sniffed and her voice trembled. "I just wish things had been different." I didn't answer right away. Some wishes weren't meant to come true. "Maybe this is how they get better," I said finally, "by being forced to face what they've done." Over the next few weeks, life began to find its rhythm. I started working again remotely, taking small freelance contracts to rebuild my savings. Megan and Ethan refused to take rent, but I insisted on paying something, half the groceries, the internet bill, anything that made me feel like I was contributing. They just smiled and let me. Some days I'd drive aimlessly through the city, not because I had anywhere to go, but because I could. The roads that once led to guilt and obligation now led to possibility. One of those afternoons, my phone rang again. "Officer Clark, we've closed the investigation on your father's property dispute," he said. "All recovered items are confirmed as yours. There's also been a formal warning placed on file for both your parents." I thanked him and hung up, but instead of relief, I felt an odd kind of sadness. Justice, it turned out, didn't erase history. It just gave you permission to stop carrying it. That weekend, I drove past my old neighborhood for the first time since everything happened. The maple trees lining the street had started to turn orange, their leaves scattering across driveways like firelight. When I slowed by the house, I saw the blinds drawn the front yard unkempt. The porch light flickered weak and pale. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize the place. Across the street, Mrs. Miller stood with a watering can in hand. She met my eyes, gave a small nod, then looked away. I could almost hear what she wasn't saying, that everyone knew now. Every whisper, every sideways glance had found its way back to the people who once prided themselves on control. I didn't stay long. The engine idled as I looked one last time at the house that had shaped and scarred me in equal measure. Then I turned the wheel and drove on. Back at the apartment, Megan was setting the table for dinner. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I saw the house," I said. "It looks smaller than I remembered." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes distance does that." After dinner, Ethan turned on a soft lamp in the corner and sat beside me on the couch. "You've done everything right, Harper," he said. "You stood up, you walked away, you protected yourself. That's not easy." I didn't know how to answer, so I just nodded, the quiet settling comfortably between us. Later that night, as I packed away my recovered camera, I found an unused memory card in the case. I slotted it in and took a picture just of the living room, the soft yellow light, Megan's laughter in the background, Rocky asleep at my feet. The click of the shutter felt final, like marking the start of something new. When I developed that first photo days later, it surprised me. There was no trace of the exhaustion I used to see in my face, no tension in my posture, just calm, maybe even contentment. The weeks after that passed peacefully. Chloe texted, often sending photos from campus, her first art project, the dorm common room strung with lights. She sounded lighter, and it gave me a kind of comfort I hadn't realized I needed. "You were right," she wrote one night. "Leaving didn't destroy anything. It just stopped the pretending." I sat with that message for a long time. Then I looked at the unopened envelopes stacked neatly on my desk, the letters from my parents that had started arriving once a week. Each one written in the same neat cursive, addressed carefully, as if formality could replace honesty. I never opened them. They sat there, a small monument to the distance I'd earned. One evening Megan noticed them. "You ever going to read those?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe not ever." She nodded, understanding. "You'll know when you're ready." The city outside hummed softly as dusk settled in. I turned off the lamp, watching the skyline from the window. The lights flickered like quiet promises, proof that new beginnings didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes they came in silence, in peace, in knowing you'd finally done what needed to be done. And as I watched the horizon, I realized that what I'd fought for all along wasn't just justice. It was the chance to live without fear, and I had it now. 3 months after everything ended, my life looked different in quiet, ordinary ways. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. The walls were painted pale blue, and the furniture was mismatched but mine. Every item in that space had been chosen, not inherited, and that small fact made the air feel lighter. The first morning I woke there, sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, and the sound of traffic drifted up from the street below. I made coffee on the second-hand machine Megan found for me and sat by the window with my cup watching the world move. It wasn't glamorous or grand, but it was peaceful, and I realized that peace was worth more than anything I'd ever paid for before. Thanksgiving came quietly that year. Megan and Ethan insisted I come to their place, and when I arrived, Chloe was already there. She looked older somehow, steady, her shoulders no longer hunched from years of walking on eggshells. She smiled when she saw me, a little uncertain at first, then genuine. "You really did it," she said softly. "You started over." The table was small, just the 4 of us, and Rocky circling underfoot waiting for scraps. We passed dishes, shared stories, and laughed in ways that felt effortless. Halfway through the meal, Megan lifted her glass. "To found family," she said, "and to boundaries worth keeping." We all raised our glasses, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the past loosen its grip completely. Later that evening, Chloe helped me wash dishes. The kitchen smelled like turkey and cinnamon, the windows fogged from steam. "Mom and Dad have been calling again," she said quietly. "They want to see me over the holidays." I nodded, wiping a plate dry. "You don't owe them anything," I told her gently. "But if you do go, go, because you want to, not because you feel guilty." She hesitated, then nodded. "I think I'll wait," she said. "I'm not ready." When I got home that night, I found a small stack of unopened envelopes waiting by the door, letters from my parents. I'd stopped counting how many had arrived by then. Each one addressed in Linda's tidy handwriting, each one postmarked from the same house that no longer felt like family. I placed them on a shelf beside the others unopened. Maybe one day I'd read them, but not now. Some things didn't need answers to find closure. Work picked up slowly after the holidays.
My supervisor offered me a full-time remote position with better pay, and I accepted without hesitation. The first time I saw my name on a paycheck that wasn't tied to anyone else, it felt like a small victory. I opened a new savings account, the kind with my name only. Every deposit felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't known was missing. Chloe visited often between classes, sometimes bringing takeout and updates from campus. She talked about her new friends, the art studio she loved, and how strange it felt not to look over her shoulder all the time. She was building a life that was hers, and I could see in her eyes what freedom looked like when it finally found space to grow. One evening in early spring, I sat at my kitchen table sorting through bills and receipts when the phone buzzed with an unknown number. For a moment, my heart jumped the way it used to, expecting the worst. But it was Officer Clark checking in one last time. "Just wanted to let you know," he said, "the case file's been officially closed. Everything's resolved." I thanked him, realizing that this was more than a legal closure. It was emotional, too. After the call, I stepped out onto the small balcony. The air was cool, and the city hummed softly below. I leaned on the railing, watching headlights weave through the streets. So much had been taken from me over the years, money, time, trust. But somehow in losing everything, I'd found something stronger, peace, and the kind of self-worth no one could tear down again. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat at that dinner table, shaking under her father's glare, believing silence was safer than standing up. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her she wasn't wrong to hope that love could change people. But I'd also tell her that love without respect will hollow you out, and that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away, even if your legs tremble while you do it. That night, I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, the city lights flickering like a quiet promise. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't wondering who needed me next. I was simply living on my own terms. Before I turned in, I opened my laptop and typed a short message to Megan and Chloe. "Dinner at my place next weekend, my turn to cook." It wasn't much, but it felt like another beginning. Looking back now, I understand that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about peace, about reclaiming what was taken and learning how to protect it. It's about knowing your worth, even when others refuse to see it. If you've ever had to choose between your own peace and someone else's comfort, I hope you choose yourself. You deserve a life that feels safe in your own hands. And if this story touched something familiar in you, take a moment to share it or leave your thoughts below. You never know who might need to hear that walking away isn't failure, it's freedom.